very much for joining me. So today's active education workshop is looking at effectively embedding dance into your PE curriculum. So my name's Eve Murphy. I'm from a company called Dance to School. So in terms of our workshop format, we are going to start by looking at the building blocks of dance. One of the first things that people always say is, well, I don't know what should be in dance. So I'll have a quick look at that, looking at structuring a dance lesson, and then thinking a little bit more about how it's kind of effectively embedded into our existing curriculum and learning by different approaches for making dances theme related, and then specifically around using a child-centered philosophy, so about pedagogy and choreographic approaches to really make sure that we're making our dance delivery child-centered. So a really brief kind of background on me, and I'll whiz through this slide because it always makes me feel really old. I qualified as a PE teacher, left Loughborough over 20 years ago now, taught in secondary PE for a while, and I was a school sport coordinator for anybody who remembers those. Specifically, I'm a gym and dance specialist. I was a gymnast and a dancer quite a while ago, but they've always been the kind of areas that I've specialised in. So that was when I was a school sport coordinator, I was constantly being asked for help on gym and dance. So if you are here because you're not that confident, you're not alone. But Dance to School was founded in 2010, based on quite a few requests from local SGOs and contacts to help upskill existing teachers. And it's all founded on the belief that you don't have to be a great dancer to teach great curriculum dance. You need to be a good teacher. And then just a tiny little bit on Dance to School, it's now a digital offering, so lesson plans and online CPD. So that's me. So I'm going to ask for people to kind of give me a little bit of insight into how dance delivery makes you feel. So little question for everybody to write in the chat. If you were asked to deliver a progressive unit of curriculum dance next week, or maybe next term, given that we're almost at the end of our year, how would it make you feel? So would you be really happy? I've just got someone in the waiting room. There we go. Would you be really happy? Would you know exactly what to do? You can make it progressive. You could make it relevant to all your children. You'd be really comfortable. Would you be okay? Not 100% sure, but you'd get through it. Or would you be unhappy in that you wouldn't really be that confident about what to do? So if you could quickly type happy, okay, or unhappy, that would be brilliant. I'll have a little quick. Oh, somebody's, yes, Brianne, happy. Somewhere in between unhappy and okay. Okay, have never had a single CPD or training for dance. Unhappy or okay. Okay, brilliant. Anybody else? I think, just 1 second. I think I've got some people in the waiting room. Sorry. See, now there's too many things going on. I'm reading the chat. I'm looking at the waiting room. I'm getting confused. I think everybody's in. Yeah, so we've got, somebody else, sorry. So we've got a real mix, but bordering between kind of unhappy and okay. Brilliant, thank you for that. So I've put this on a slide of its own because I really, really passionately believe this. And I said it at the beginning, you don't have to be a great dancer to teach great curriculum dance. It's about being a good teacher. When I very first set up on my own, and my theory was I would have a few different teachers to go into school and deliver dance, put out an advert and had loads of people kind of apply and send CVs, and on paper we had backing dancers for Beyonce and people that have danced in the West End, and I couldn't wait to meet these people, and just because they had such a great CV, and then you put them in front of a class and it was an absolute car crash. Because it's about teaching, it's not about dancing. So if you've said you don't feel happy, or if you've like, I'm okay, but I'm not sure, you're not on your own, but equally, you need to just have a little bit of confidence that you have kind of 90%, 95% of what you need by being a good deliverer in school. So hopefully by the end of today, you'll have a few ideas that will help you build on that as well, to give you that kind of complete picture. So again, if we're kind of having a look in the chat, just to get a picture of what dance looks like in your school, or if you don't deliver dance at the moment, what your kind of preconception is that dance should look like in a school. So you're just going to type A, B, or C. Is it A, a teacher or a dance specialist teaching a choreographed routine to your children? Is it B, video tutorials that children watch and copy? Or is it C, use of different choreographic approaches and stimuli? So if you can type A, B, or C into the chat, that would be amazing. Let's have a look at what we've got. So we've got A or B usually, C, A or B predominantly, A or B. Brilliant, thank you. Let me close that down. So a mixture, but predominantly we're looking at A's and B's, which is kind of really helpful to give that view. So I guess just before moving on, from my point of view, curriculum dance shouldn't be about you making up a dance and that pressure of having to make up a dance, stand at the front and teach it to your children. Because all you're doing when you do that is teaching them the kind of the physical element. We're not addressing the whole child by just standing there and teaching skills to them. They're doing something, but they're not thinking about it. They're not communicating with other children. We're not developing that whole child, whether we're thinking about head, heart, hands, whether we're thinking about me and PE, whatever kind of model we use for PE delivery. It needs to be about more than just the doing. And if you only stand and teach, or you only play a video and they copy it, it's kind of physical activity and not necessarily physical education. So it's looking at how, as non-specialists, we can go, right, how can we make the most of dance as a whole, and help it develop that whole child? And we need to see it as a tool or a vehicle for developing that child, not something that we do at our children. So with that in mind, I guess the first thing we need to understand are the building blocks of dance, because I'm a big believer in once you've got a bit more of an understanding of something, you feel a lot more confident to deliver it. So in its simplest term, we're thinking about our actions are the what of dance, so they're what we do. And we're always really comfortable, I think, with the what of kind of invasion games or net and wall games or other specific things that we do, but not necessarily dance. So put simply, there's 5 things that should be included in a dance: travel, turn, jump, gesture, and stillness. If at any point I say anything that you're not happy with and you want to ask a question, just pop it in the chat. The one I usually get asked about there is gesture. And a gesture is simply a move that conveys a meaning but doesn't travel. So something like a nod, a kick, a punch, something like that. So if you're thinking, what do I need to put in my dances? It's those 5 things: travel, turn, jump, gesture, and stillness. Okay, we then move on to, once we've got our actions, we need to think about space, relationships, and dynamics. Now, ASDR, or ASDA, as I kind of get my children to try and remember it, it doesn't change whether you're teaching reception or whether you're teaching GCSE and A-level children. Action, space, dynamics, and relationships are the things that we need to think about when we're delivering dance. So in terms of our space, we've got direction, level, pathway, and area. Relationships is canon. For anybody who doesn't know what canon means, it's one after the other. So it's where somebody does something, somebody else does it. So if they're all in a line, one drops down, then the next, then the next, then the next. That's canon. Unison just means all together. And mirror image obviously is mirroring a partner or another kind of group's actions, where you're looking like a reflection of somebody else. And then dynamics is kind of how we perform. Dynamics can be one of the hardest things for children to do, because obviously until they've got that control, actually controlling how they do something is really difficult. It actually just being able to do it to start with can be really tricky. So but how, in terms of whether it's fluid, whether it's jerky, whether it's fast, whether it's slow, hard and soft, heavy, light, those kinds of things. So in its simplest terms, when you're planning kind of a scheme of work or thinking about a skills progression document, we need to be thinking about our actions, what they're going to do, use of space, relationships, and dynamics. So for example, reception in Key Stage 1, we might only do levels, whereas by the time we get to the end of Key Stage 2, in an ideal world, They can work out how being in a circle in a big area could represent, I don't know, a wheel if you're doing transport, or how circular pathways might represent your theme, how working on different levels can add interest, how using different directions makes something interesting. But by the end of Key Stage 2 and going into Key Stage 3, we should be able to talk to our children about all of these things. So there are building blocks. They're what should be in our dance. So then we need to think about kind of structuring a lesson. And this is where I just feel really passionately about thinking about embedding it into what we do. It should be the same in terms of how we plan and deliver our lessons as we do in kind of other lessons. So we should always share our learning objectives, or whatever learning language you use. We should always use them. I take a whiteboard with me into the hall, or if you've got a smart board, but they should be displayed just like you would do in another lesson. And you should be thinking about the different component parts of your lesson. I always work in a 4-part lesson. Obviously, if you work differently in your school or your company or organisation, you can adapt this. But this is kind of an overview of how I would structure things. So in terms of that lesson structure, the first part is introduce and reinforce. So it's introducing what you're doing in that lesson and reinforcing previous learning. So just like you would do in any other lesson, what you're doing when you enter your classroom relates to what you're doing later and enables your children to do whatever challenge it is you're wanting them to do, because they've had a little introduction to it in the I guess the warm-up phase, if you like. So in that introduction and reinforcement section, I share my learning outcomes or learning objectives, whatever your aims, whatever learning language you use. So for example, if you want your children to work in pairs, I do my warm-up activity in pairs. If you want them to use mirror image, I do some mirror image stretching. If you want them to do some choreography using pictures, I play the corners game, where there's a picture in each corner of the room. They dance in the middle, and then they run to a corner when the music stops and do an action that fits that picture. If you want them to use words, I do that activity, but with words in the corner of the room. If you want them to use a poem later on in the lesson, I'd read a poem and get them to move around to all the different words that they can hear. But whatever you're doing later on in your lesson, it should be introduced. It might also be reinforcing previous learning. So if you created a motif, you might walk through that motif. I did a lesson yesterday where we played musical statues, but every time I stopped the music, they did the next action that was in our dance. So I called out sort of seaweed or kind of fish or whatever word it was that they come up for an action for, and we remembered our dance by doing a little warm-up activity. So that would be our introduce and reinforce section. Explore and establish is where children work independently of you. So that's where I'm a big believer in you not standing at the front and teaching a dance, not only because it's pressure on you, and let's face it, not many people other than probably me and Brianne want to make up a little dance in our kitchen and then stand and teach it, but equally it's about giving children that opportunity for creativity. So the explore and establish bit is where you give them some kind of a stimulus. A stimulus is just something that kind of triggers an idea. So it might be a picture, it might be a poem, a prop, a piece of music, a mind map. But you give them something that they can look at, feel, think about, and create ideas to. Now, what they come up with in that explore and establish bit might never make it into your kind of performance piece, but they're given that opportunity to work independently and creatively on their own. The develop and create section, third section, is where you go, right, we've got all these ideas, how do we start to pull them together? So effectively, as the teacher, you sort of refine that content. So for example, in the explore and establish bit, there might have been in 6 groups, they might have all had a picture, and they might have had to do an action to that picture. They might have come up with 10 different actions, and you as the teacher pick the best action from each group and then piece it together, and you end up with a little short section that's one action from each group. So that's just one example of how you can do it. But your job is almost to kind of coordinate and facilitate what they're doing rather than necessarily making it up for them. And then there should always, in my view, be a performer review section at the end. And that is an opportunity for either teacher, peer, or self-evaluation. So it might be that it is forming part of your assessment for learning. So you want to watch, see where they're up to, see what they're ready to move on to. You might want them to use iPads so that they can film each other and then watch it. You might want them to do some self-review. But there should, even if it's as simple as saying, right, you're going to all perform to me now, and you get them all and talk to them about what does good performance look like. So about being in time to the music, head up, making their actions as big as possible, give them a little checklist on the board of what you're looking for, and then just get them to perform. You could split the class in half, get them to perform to each other. And the other key in that bit is talking to them about being a really good audience, because creating an environment where children feel brave enough to stand up and perform is really, really important. So I spend ages on that bit, getting them to practice clapping really enthusiastically for each other, and definitely not talking. And it sounds really silly, but that's really important, because you need to create that environment where they're happy. So in terms of embedding it into your teaching or into your curriculum, if you use the lesson structure or format or learning language that you use in other lessons, it kind of gives it the same status when you're delivering your dance or your PE as everything else. I think somebody's just put something in the chat. I'm going to have a really quick look, see if there's something I need to answer now.
I can read it to you if you want, Eve.
Okay, so this...
so it says, so this approach to teaching dance is best done using a guided discovery approach to teaching, or is there a number of teaching styles that could be used?
Yeah, so it depends really on the kind of different... on the different methods that you're using. I wouldn't say only use guided discovery, but yeah, fundamentally that opportunity for children to kind of go away and have a little think about it. It might be reciprocal teaching. You might get them to come up with something together. But I would rather than that kind of autocratic style where you're telling them what to do, that opportunity for guided discovery is really important. Okay, so in terms of embedding it into existing curriculum, enhancing classroom learning, I very much believe in teaching curriculum dance in a theme-related manner, but I think doing that well, how do I put this? It's not always done well, and I think understanding what it means, or from my point of view, is really important. So for me, it's about, for example, opportunities to extend keyword vocabulary. It might be about physical retelling of stories or processes or ideas. I did a scheme of work with one set of children. We were doing the story of Rama and Sita, and we had an action for each section of the story, and by me doing that action to them, they remembered what the next bit of the story was, and it helped them to remember what had happened. It's about opportunities to use a range of stimuli that relate to your theme, that embed different thoughts and ideas and content. It's not just a street dance to a piece of music that has your topic in a song title. And for me, it's a really, really creative and exciting way to explore different ideas of things that you're already doing in your lessons. So I would, just put back a sec. I would always, if possible, try to take whatever it is that I'm delivering in class and use that theme. It might not always be practical, but if you can, it can really help children to kind of develop an understanding of what you're doing in a classroom as well. I think the other reason for making it theme related is if you ask most teachers which area they feel kind of least confident about in PE, it will always be dance. And I think if it sits on the edge of our comfort zone, it's something that we find really difficult. If we can bring it in and see that it's actually kind of adding value to what you're doing in your day-to-day, it can be really, really useful. I've lost my little icon. There we go. So in terms of kind of using a range of stimuli and choreographic approaches, I mentioned earlier about that explore and establish bit, and how you can give the children opportunity to work independently. So I always start with a mind map of my theme. So the first thing I do in my first lesson is sit down with the children and ask them to tell me everything that they know about the topic. Now that doesn't always work because it might be a new topic, and I did actually try and do it with one class that we were doing rivers, and they'd never done anything before. So I quickly had to get the teacher to tell me the keywords that he wanted them to know. and we did a little mind map on the board. So they were all words that they'd never heard before. But then actually by mind mapping those words and then saying, right, how could those words be actions and how can we come up with some actions? I then rubbed the mind map off the board at the end and got them to tell me what the key words have been because of the actions, and they knew them all. So he was really pleased that they kind of develop that understanding of that topic. But I would always start with that mind map, and then I would create a little motif. A motif is just a short section of dance that kind of embodies the theme of your dance. So if this was my theme, these are the things that the children might say to you. And I would kind of call out those words and get the children to do an action that they think fits, and then we'd sort of piece them all together. So mind maps can work really well, and I always use them in the first week to create that little bit of a motif or like a starting point. Pictures are really great. So obviously you can just screen grab some Google images. You can print them off and give them to children. You can have them up on the smartboard. Kids always amaze me with what they come up with based on pictures. So this is one that I've used before. I don't know why I don't always find it that easy to kind of come up with things from looking at a picture. I don't know why. But just to give you a couple of examples, this image here on the top right, which is the kind of double yellow lines in the middle of the road, I showed this to a class and one of the children said, Miss, we should start in 2 rows in the centre of the class. That should be our starting position because of that picture. And then the bench in the bottom right-hand corner, there were some children in a group of 4 and 2 of them kind of bent down on the floor on their hands and knees, and another 2 sat on top of them as their start position because of this. Obviously, some of the more obvious ones, you've got children kind of leaves falling and twisting and turning, but this can be a really nice way of getting children to come up with the ideas. So again, when you're thinking about that second section of the lesson plan, in that explore and establish bit, pictures work really well, and you don't have to do a different stimuli every week. You can spend a little bit of time using different ones, but pictures work really nicely. I love using poems. Really nice, obviously, for cross-curricular literacy links. This you can use it in a number of different ways. You could write a poem if you want to. If you wanted to. It might be something that you're using in class or that the teacher's using. If you're delivering in school, it might be something that the class teacher's using and wants you to use. Another really nice thing that I get the children to do is to write their own, particularly for Key Stage 2 children. So the Rivers scheme of work that I was talking about, I got all the children to write their own poem, and they were amazing. They were absolutely brilliant, and they coloured them all in, and they cut out the edges of the paper to make it like a wavy line, and they put glitter on them and coloured them in, and they brought them in, and it was such an amazing lesson where they got to kind of read their poems to each other, and the pride that they had in that, and then saying how they could take out the adjectives and the words and how they could then turn those into movement, and it's that ownership, I think, that real ability to kind of embed it into what you're doing or what's happening in the wider kind of remit of the school, and make it really relevant and important rather than just something that everybody's scared off and feels a little bit embarrassed about doing. But poems work really nicely. Just thinking on a differentiation front, I use poems in a number of different ways. So for example, on Wednesday I was working with a little boy that didn't really read that brilliantly, and I read a sentence to him and asked him to pick out the word that he liked, and it happened to be fish, because we were reading a poem about under the sea, and I drew a fish for him because that was easy for him to understand on a little whiteboard, and gave that to him. With very little children, I sometimes read the poem, and then I'll write one word for them on a little whiteboard and hand them out. With older children, you might print it off and you might cut it up and give them a sentence. And with your upper Key Stage 2 children, you might just have that up on the smartboard and they can look at it and pick whatever they want to. So you can make it easier or more challenging depending on the ability and the age of your children. But it works really, really nicely. And then the last one is about using a prop. So whenever I mention a prop, I think people think like top hat and cane to kind of dance with. But in this sense, I'm talking about like a tactile item that helps to spark ideas. So it's something that children can touch and drop and manipulate, describe, discuss. So again, we're thinking about that whole child. We're thinking about developing their communication, developing their ability to kind of describe things and find words and work with a partner and understand each other. So they kind of look at how something moves. So we're doing Under the Sea in one of my lessons, and I took in kind of scarves that were kind of loosely meant to represent sort of waves or seaweed, and we kind of threw and dropped them, and they watched how they moved and then made up some actions that fit. So it can work really nicely. So just a couple of examples. So I sometimes teach a recycling unit, and just a simple piece of paper that you drop and you watch it move, and then get the children to describe how it's moving. So it's kind of floating, or it's gliding, it's twisting, it's turning. And then if you scrunch it up, like that would happen when it was being recycled, and you drop it, there's then a difference in the way that it moves. So we can start to think about our dynamics and the fact that it drops and bounces and rolls, which is different to kind of float and glide. And then they come up with different ideas. Magnets work really nicely in electricity. And again, kind of movements like attracting and repelling. And we had one where there were two groups of children kind of coming together and moving apart and then finding partners, and that works really nicely. And paper planes are great as well. Obviously, from a classroom management point of view, you have to be a little bit hot on making sure there's not just a million paper planes floating around all over, but that works really nice. To do that sometimes with reception children, and I make them for them. We make a couple and then we throw them, and then we talk about how they move and can we kind of copy that high to low or that shape or that speed. But there's loads of ideas. Some themes lend themselves really well to using a prop, and some don't. And if they don't, like, you kind of don't have to force it, but there can be really nice things that you can use dependent on your theme. So then in terms of that kind of embracing different sorts of pedagogy and in different kind of, we talk about choreographic approaches in dance delivery. There's loads of different ways of doing it. There's 5. Helpfully, I've written 4 on here. Well, I'll talk about the other one. So we talk about using 5 different choreographic approaches. A choreographic approach is just the way that the children work to create ideas. So you might use small group choreography. So as I've just been explaining about giving children some kind of a stimuli, you might put them in a little group and you might give them a couple of words from a poem, and then they've got to come up with some actions in their groups. There might be a section of your dance where they kind of do their motif together and then they all travel out into their groups and do a little bit of a group dance. Or you might just use small group choreography, tough word that, small group choreography to come up with some ideas that then get shared with the whole class, and then you piece together. So there's a couple of different ways of using it. Whole group choreography is where you kind of have the whole class in front of you, and you might say a word. So you might say a word off your mind map, and then every child in the room does an action that they think fits that word. The really lovely thing about this is those children that don't feel confident to do it don't have to do anything, because other children around them will be moving. And what that means is that they get to kind of build their confidence by looking around a little bit. And they're almost sort of seeing examples of good practice. So it's that modelling from other children in the class. And you'll notice that as you start to say more and more words, and more of your children join in. So whole group choreography can work really nicely sort of in the early part of a scheme of work where you're just trying to build your confidence for your children. Teacher-led, obviously, is if you feel confident and you want to. And I know I said at the beginning about not kind of standing at the front and teaching or showing a video. There's nothing wrong with that at all. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But for me, it should be kind of the start of what the children then develop. But there's certainly a place for you maybe making up a little bit of a motif and teaching it, and then the children go off and develop it. So you might teach them a really short motif and then say to them, right, I want you to go off in your groups, and I want you to develop those ideas, but include a change in level. So they're all doing different actions, but they're doing different levels, or they're putting in different directions, or they're trying to include mirror image. So you can give them the kind of actions, if you will, and then give them things to develop. Improvisation is beautiful for kind of reception in Key Stage 1 children. Key Stage 2 children tend to feel a little bit, what's the right word? A little bit embarrassed, shall we say. Not all of them, but so improvisation, you literally just put on a piece of music. And if you do it with reception children, it is absolutely magical. If you just say to them, just move how you feel, it is joyous to watch, and they'll be kind of jumping around the room, and because they're just totally uninhibited. And all you need to do then, when you're delivering, is watch what they're doing and then say, oh, I loved that idea, and then you just kind of take their idea and refine it. So, and sometimes you have to be quite creative with what you can see, because sometimes there's not always that much that you can use, but you might see some child put their arm in the air, and then you might say, our first action is going to be going 1, 2, 3, 4. So you just take their ideas and you literally just piece it together. The other one, let me see if I just put it on a slide of its own. No, just totally missed it off. Sorry about that. So the other one is chance choreography. So chance choreography is where you write a list of actions on a board. So they might be theme related, they might be linked to the kind of travel, turn, jump, gesture, stillness at the beginning, and you write them on the board, and in an ideal world just put kind of six actions up on the board, and then you put children in little groups and give them a dice, a piece of paper and a pencil, and they roll the dice, and if it lands on number 3 and your third action is it might be a jump, they write jump down, and they do that kind of maybe 4 times, and they've got a little list of words that you're then giving them as their structure, and they go off and create a dance. So we're kind of scaffolding their learning, so we're supporting them, so they're not just kind of off you go, do whatever you want, but it's that kind of scaffolding to help them be creative and help them go off and develop their own ideas. Because if you say to a group of children, go and make up a dance, you'll have the kind of me and Brianne's of this world. I'm sure Brianne will agree with me, but you'll have the kind of me and Brianne's who kind of love that kind of challenge, and they go off, but then they might get a little bit sidetracked and they might do their exam dance that they're doing next weekend, and the other kids in their group haven't got a clue what's going on. And then you get your other children that just don't feel able to access that task because they can't think of anything to do. Whereas if you've given them a list and said, do this, it's much easier. So there's 5 different ways that you can come up with ideas, or help your children to come up with ideas, and you are only involved in one of them. So if any of you are sat here going, I don't feel okay about teaching dance, just don't ever do the teacher-led bit, and use those other 4, chance, improvisation, whole group and small group choreography, to get your children to create actions. Your job when they've created actions is still to refine them. So you still need to talk to them about their time, and you still need to talk to them about their extension. So they're stretching their arms and making their actions really clear, and they're pointing their toes. So all the things that we talk to children about in gymnastics, and that kind of sort of core stability and control and all of those things are ours to then kind of develop, but the actions they can come up with themselves. So I thought it might be useful just to give some kind of delivery ideas so that you finish or you leave with a couple of ideas to take away as well. I was going to say to use this half term, but we're all nearly done, aren't we? So maybe to kind of keep in your back pocket for when we come back in September and we've all got a bit of energy. So in terms of nursery and reception, just thinking from a general point of view, everything in nursery and reception works brilliantly if you make it story-based. And I love using stories. Lots about creative movement. Nursery and action rhymes obviously work really well, particularly with nursery, but reception as well. Just really simple stuff, heads, shoulders, knees and toes, all that kind of thing. really focusing on that kind of proprioception awareness of where their body is in space, because that awareness is really, really important. It's fundamental to reading and writing, thinking about things like letter orientation. Can they understand which way around their B and their D goes? Their ability to kind of position letters, that awareness of where they are in space and their grounding. They can scan from left to right, all those kinds of things. We quite often see nursery children will kind of come and sit in a line, and they'll sit in a gap between two children that actually isn't there, because they've kind of got no understanding of sort of how big they are and how much space they need to sit in. So it's really, really valuable to help develop all those other things by developing our kind of fine and gross motor skills with nursery and reception children, really focusing on developing fundamental stepping patterns. So we're thinking about kind of 1-to-1 same, 1-to-1 different, 1-to-2, 2-to-1, and 2-to-2, and 2-to-1. I think that's them all. But just all those different ways. So hopping, skipping, jumping, galloping, all of those things that help to develop that physical literacy. So in terms of specific activity ideas, I've got a little picture of like literally my all-time favourite preschool character. The Gruffalo works brilliantly. Any of you without children or don't teach nursery reception, you might not know what he is. But basically anything by Julia Donaldson is amazing. The Gruffalo works brilliantly because it's pretty much split into sections. You can read about 2 or 3 pages each week to the children, and the little mouse basically meets a different character each week. It also works really brilliantly because there's an amazing soundtrack by a composer called René Aubrey, which you can kind of get on YouTube or what's what I'm looking for, on Apple Music or iTunes, however you get your music, but it's readily available and it's really, really brilliant. There's a different piece of classical music for each character, and you can get the children to listen and move in different ways. So that works really nicely. So get yourself the Gruffalo book and create some little lessons based around the different characters. So in terms of Key Stage 1, again, be thinking, as we've been talking about today, about making it theme-based, really embedding it into your existing content, still about creative movement, really focusing on the use of stimuli. So we talked about the 4 Ps: pictures, poems, props, and pieces of music. There's absolutely nothing wrong with dipping into UIFS content. I was speaking to a teacher yesterday about how I've been teaching my reception because we've done dance for a year because it's been difficult to do anything else with it, with equipment and so on and so forth. So we've done dance reception in Key Stage 1. We've done dance for a year, and the stuff that they were coming up with yesterday. I've had children in Key Stage 2 that couldn't do what my reception children were doing just because they've been doing it loads. Whereas I've taught Key Stage 2 children who've never done dance before, and we've gone right back to kind of fundamental movements. And so there's nothing wrong with dipping into content up and down the year groups. So again, thinking about theme related ideas, and animals is a really nice one for Key Stage 1. I like using the Shakira Waka Waka music, just the kids really like it. That little image on the left hand side is kind of an example of an image that I might use with my children. And the idea is not necessarily about them kind of moving around like that animal, although lots of them will do that. But it's also about, for example, looking at, like, can they do a certain pathway because they can see a snake, or can they? So it's how they transfer those ideas and what they can see into what they do and when they move. So for me, I would do, so if we're talking about kind of a standard kind of 6-week scheme, if you deliver in half-term blocks, you might create a motif. So just a mind map in week 1, then you might use a picture, a poem, a prop, and then you might pull it all together and then have an assessment week. So you can just use those ideas however they work for you. But that would be a kind of an example for Key Stage 1. And then here, helpfully, here's an example of chance choreography that was missing off our list earlier. It works really, really nicely for Key Stage 2. So, but again, in general, thinking about making things theme based, you can focus more choreography based, especially kind of year 6 really love kind of making up their own ideas. But like I said, if we're just making sure we scaffold it and structure it so that it's not just kind of the kid that goes to dance class out of school telling everybody what to do and nobody else being able to do it. Still about creative content, still about using different stimuli, but they can obviously be more sophisticated or a little bit more advanced. But again, absolutely nothing wrong with dipping back into that Key Stage 1 content as well. So that activity idea of chance choreography, I've got here a list of 10 actions numbered 0 to 9, and you can get children to use their date of birth. If you're using lower Key Stage 2, you might get them to do the day and the month. So they'd end up with kind of 4 actions. And if it's upper Key Stage 2, you might get them to do day, month, year. So they've got 6 actions for their list. So an example, if we use my birthday, and I'll see I'm really old, we've got 0, 3, 0, 3, 7, 9. So for me, 0 is jump, 3 is travel, jump, travel again, and then 7 is turn, and 9 is roll. So that would be my little kind of structure. So you might do that in week 1. It might take them a couple of weeks to make up that dance, and then the next week you could say, right, you're going to work with a partner and you're going to use half your ideas and half theirs, but you're going to use mirror image, or you're going to go in a group and you're going to focus on your formation, or you're going to focus on developing use of canon when you're in a group. So it's not about, when you're delivering curriculum dance, it's not about making this kind of 3 to 5 minute long dance that's all singing, all dancing and is amazing. It's about that core section of actions that you then let the children kind of develop and build. I would always make it progressive so that it builds, so that each week I'm adding something on. So my aim for the end of each lesson is to just have a little bit of dance. So I generally work in a motif where all the class are performing. Then there's a little bit where they work individually and they all go wherever they like. Then they kind of come together in pairs, then maybe in a group, and then back to that whole group again. But I just build that up each week. And so it might only be kind of 16 counts, so it might be 32 counts. So we work generally in counts of 4 in dance, and anything around kind of 16 to 32 counts per week. It's only a really small amount. It sounds like a lot, but it's not. And just build it up each week and add it on. So hopefully that's given you kind of some ideas of things that you can do, A, to kind of embed it into your curriculum, but then B, things that you can take away. If anybody's got any questions, please do feel free to put them in the chat. So I'll see. Deathly quiet. Or you can just unmute yourselves and ask. Stunned silence.
I'll ask a question.
Go on, Brianne.
What are some of your tips? So you kind of said about like people like us that don't mind like doing it all and having a go. And how would you encourage children that really don't like it? Like I remember I had a boy once who just point blank refused to join in with dance. It was quite impressive how stubborn he was. He just did not want to join in. What would you do, especially with the old one, like older boys especially?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I get asked it all the time, and I genuinely mean it when I say I very rarely come across that problem. And the key to it is finding a theme that they will relate to and making sure that so I can guarantee if you go in and teach that, and I've done it myself, as a kind of really enthusiastic sort of dancer that wants to sort of have a dance and teach everybody to do it, I will guarantee if I walked into my school next week and taught a dance at my children, I can already tell you the list of names of children that wouldn't do it. Whereas if I walk in and go, here's a poem or here's a picture or what would you do? Children will never make up an action that they don't feel comfortable doing. So I think it's the way that you approach it. What I'd always advise against, and this is just me, but I'd always advise against, people say, oh, I always tell the children that I'm really nervous too. And I totally get that need to be, to kind of make your children feel better. But I think what that generally does is gives them permission to not want to do it. So I think that's the other thing. If you go in being really positive, you wouldn't go into your maths lesson and go, I know you don't like long division, I don't like it either, so let's just not bother. So it's those two things really, giving them ownership so that they are proud of what they've done rather than embarrassed of what they've done, and then being really positive, even if you don't feel it, being really positive, so that they do it as well. And because you're their best role model, you know, if they see, if you're talking about boys, if they see a male teacher or a male coach really going for it, then that's really positive. You've got a real kind of opportunity to encourage those kids. I think we've got a couple in the chat.
I really like what you just said there about children will only perform what they're comfortable with. That's so true. I've never thought about it, but that's so true. You never get a child saying, right, I'm going to do a backflip. That's like, you've never done one before. Like,
I've totally got this.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And they just won't do things that they will, and then they'll make something up and then they'll see that it looks good and they'll feel really proud of it, and they'll watch their friend doing something that they've made up and taught them, and it makes it about something more than just doing an action that you're uncomfortable with. So yeah, that would be kind of my view on that, really. Anybody got anything else?
I've got a question, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. What was your name, sorry?
It's Jay Kinsey on the computer, but it's Joe Curran.
Hi, Joe.
I was wondering, with a lot of other, like when we do sports and stuff, there's a real importance on making sure the kids are moving for like 80% of the lesson. Is it okay to kind of come away from that for dance, just to give them time to collaborate and communicate and get ideas and stuff?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? And I was speaking to somebody from AFP about where that guidance is on how long you have to be active for, and I think there's a couple of schools of thought in that, in terms of, well, from my point of view, don't have them sat around for too long. So if you still want them to be active.
Yeah.
So when I say about kind of giving them a picture or a poem, I literally give them like 30 seconds sometimes to kind of chat to their partner and think of a word and then move. So it's still not a kind of, so whilst I wouldn't necessarily be looking at my lessons going, oh God, are we active 80% of the time? Because I don't necessarily worry about that pressure of doing that. Categorically, they have to be being active, and it's making sure that, so I would only ever use one stimulus a lesson, so there wasn't a lot of time kind of sitting around or chatting, and making it as active as possible. So when I said about using a poem, I read it to them as the warm-up, and they move as they listen, and every time they hear a word that they think they can move to, they move around. So there's not loads of sitting down, but there's just that opportunity to kind of collaborate and communicate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just making sure we were on the same lines. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Anyone else? Let's just check the chat one last time. There we go. Okay, cool. No, right. So I guess in terms of a quick recap, hopefully you've got a kind of good understanding of those building blocks. So in terms of our action is our what, space is kind of our level, our pathway, our direction and use of area. Relationships is about canon, unison and mirror, and dynamics is effectively how we do something. Talked about structure in a dance lesson and that 4-part approach, which obviously you can adapt for what you use in school or your kind of organisation, but making sure children have that opportunity to kind of work independently, but then bring it all back together and build something each week. Looking at making dances theme related, but it not just being a sticker slap type approach where you just do your normal street dance but with a particular theme of music, but actually really using it to help develop their understanding of what you're doing in the rest of the curriculum, and then really using that kind of child-centered philosophy and those different choreographic approaches so that the children are proud of their ideas and don't feel too nervous about getting involved. So I guess the last thing for me to say is just thank you so much. I know what a really, really challenging year. We were talking about it before you guys all came on, Brianne and I. It's been roller coaster of a year, and for you guys to kind of, I guess, come on and right towards the end of term as well. I know what a challenge it's all been, so thank you so much for joining me. If you've got any further questions, obviously you can get in touch with Active Education or you can contact me directly. which is Eve at Dance to School. And if I can ever help, quite often, sometimes people just contact me and ask me what music I'd recommend for something. And if I can help, I'm always happy to help. So please do get in touch. But I can say one thing is be brave, be confident, have fun, and know that you can do it.